This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to the Monopoly Report. The Monopoly Report is dedicated to chronicling and analyzing the impact of privacy, antitrust, and other regulations on the global advertising economy. If you are new to the Monopoly Report, you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter at monopoly-report.com, and you can check out all of the Monopoly Report podcasts at monopolyreportpod.com. I'm Alan Chappell. I'm a privacy and regulatory attorney and have worked with hundreds of digital media and ad tech companies over the years, and taken a bunch of those companies to successful exits. I also publish a monthly regulatory outlook for digital media worldwide called the Chappell Regulatory Insider. You can find a link to a sample copy of the Chappell Regulatory Insider in the show notes. This week, my guest is Ben Isaacson. For more than 25 years, Ben has been a leading privacy professional and trusted counsel. During the Internet 1.0 era, Ben was instrumental in launching the first self-regulatory guidelines for email marketing, addressable TV, and mobile marketing, as well as lobbying extensively for the CAN-SPAM Act as executive director of the Association for Interactive Marketing, which was ultimately acquired by the DMA. He then served as Experian's global head of digital privacy for a decade. Ben now leads a team of great attorneys at his firm InHouse Privacy. Ben is a member of the State Bar of California, holds a JD from the Thomas Jefferson School of Law, and a BA from the University of Kansas, where he competed as a springboard diver. Go Jayhawks. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. We talk about how California's definition of data broker is far broader than many companies realize. We get into the ad tech ecosystem and talk a bit about data clean rooms. We talk about the authorized agent business, the Delete Act's drop deletion mechanism, and what Ben sees as the single biggest misconception he keeps hearing from CEOs in 2026. This last nugget is worth the price of admission alone. So let's get to it. Hey, Ben, thanks for coming on the pod. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I feel like it's been a while, so it's great to catch up. So where's my audience finding you today?
I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's actually spring, even though it's still February, 50 degrees.
50 degrees. Wow. Well, that's actually better than it is here in New York, I think. So you got that going for you. And then you've got all the Laverne and Shirley nostalgia.
Yeah, the place they filmed Happy Days is actually right.
Oh, so it was Happy Days, but I thought Laverne and Shirley as well.
They were a spin-off sort of the Happy Days success, yeah.
Okay, I'm sure the entire audience would like nothing more than to talk a little bit about Fonzie and Potsy. But let's jump in. So what's your privacy origin story? And how did you find your way into the privacy space?
So like any great stories, it starts at a bar. In my case, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I met a guy in 1995 who founded a trade association for internet and interactive television companies. And he was trying to explain to me what a trade association was. I was still in college at the time. And then a year later, I find myself working for this guy in Washington, D.C. and had to figure out how to register as a lobbyist for an industry that really didn't exist yet. And then fast forward a couple of years and the association was acquired by the Direct Marketing Association. I took over and really started focusing on self-regulatory initiatives at the time, like email marketing, which was very privacy centric and opt-in consent and all the things we were trying to work on with best practices, at the same time still lobbying for, the CAN-SPAM Act and preemption of state laws. And so I really got deep in this in the late 90s. So it's been a long road.
Wow. Yeah, you were a true OG. Now, I forget, who is it that founded AIM?
Yeah, the guy I met at the time was Peter Waldheim, who was a Washington, D.C. kind of insider guy, originally from Milwaukee. And then the other guy was Andy Cernovitz, who was more the face of the organization, who was sort of the brilliant entrepreneur behind, understanding the internet and ITV and kind of where the industry was going.
Right. And then he eventually went on and did the Word of Mouth Marketing Association or something like that, right?
Yeah. Word of Mouth Marketing Association and 3 or 4 other things.
He's a serial entrepreneur. When you know your lane, I guess you just keep going there. I mean, Greg Stewart is sort of similar, right? I mean, with the IAB and then the MMA.
Yeah, totally.
I want to jump in and talk about the CCPA. It was started as a ballot initiative, which was turned into a law, and then it was updated into CPRA as a separate ballot initiative. So the Cal Privacy team has had an almost unprecedented amount of power to write and rewrite the rule set. And how effective has Cal Privacy and the CPPA board been in terms of imposing their stamp on this rule set?
I guess, I would first start by not dismissing the Attorney General's office, who has been incredibly influential in enforcing CCPA, especially with their recent Disney action a week ago. And Sephora and DoorDash, like big brands, AG's been going after.
Sure.
CPPA's got some other big brands behind it with Honda, Todd Snyder, Tractor Supply. But I think the reason we're talking primarily is really all of the enforcement actions they've made against data brokers so far, at least a dozen, that are really interesting from both a regulatory perspective and just sort of a precedent-setting tone as far as what the CPPA is going to be doing for the next few years, both in the data broker space, but also in the broader privacy space.
Right. And I didn't mean to diminish the role of the AG, but I was thinking more from a policy standpoint where the AG has got some influence, but that, team of Alistair McTaggart and Mr. Kemp and a number of their colleagues seems to have, really been able to impose a lot of their policy ideas into the debate here.
Yeah, for sure. I think that it started, really with the CCPA even before the CPRA ballot measure took place, which was like this loophole around this global privacy control, like opt-out preference signals, right? Which was sort of, I think, intuitively included in CCPA, but really wasn't clear. But then the AG came out and enforced with Sephora. And then, again, they had started enforcing it, through CPRA action. And then the regulations are now making it much more complicated, with the CPPA as far as like, really what you can and can't do with your website to try and get notice and consent. Even if you see a global privacy control signal, you can't like say, hey, do you really want us to stop using your data for these purposes? It's really complicated. And the regulations around CCPA are so depth and intense, I would say, similar to kind of the breadth of GDPR and the regulatory power, especially now also with the Delete Act as a secondary law that CPPA gets to enforce and issue regulations around, really broadens their capability. And frankly, they're much more stronger, in my opinion, as far as enforcement goes than the FTC or any other regulatory body in the United States.
And is that a good thing, a bad thing, or a mixed thing?
It's hard to say good or bad. So far, I would say 75% of both the combined, I think, AG and CPPA actions have sort of hit on the money some of the key issues that really do need to be addressed in, kind of common data misuse, I would say. Whereas 25% are expanding maybe interpretations of law that maybe aren't exactly on point, I think maybe with the legislative intent, or maybe some of the fines were a little excessive. There's going to be those kinds of like potential overreach situations. But I think overall on the balance, I think they're hitting the right mark so far.
Yeah, I would agree. I think to their credit, the enforcement has been fairly measured, and they've sort of done what they said they were going to do. And I don't feel like there's too many surprises. I think where they sort of move away from that conceptually is as they are trying to impose what I would call maybe new policies. Even the pricing initiative, I think it's a debatable point whether that really fits squarely into the four corners of the statute, no?
I think, I was just at the California Lawyers Association event last week where they were talking about this pricing issue and some of the really interesting questions of law that it raises, and whether, again, it is in scope today. I agree with you. I don't think it's on point, same as like dark patterns and some of the other sorts of regulatory initiatives that I think we've seen in the regs that are, again, sort of creating new law that, we'll see how much they're enforced, but really sets a tone beyond, again, what we've seen from the FTC or other regulatory bodies in the U.S.
Yeah, and it's noteworthy. They do have a fair amount of capability in terms of writing the rule set. Maybe the people of California did want them to, go a little further and push the bounds. I think a lot of this is going to ultimately be tested.
Yeah. I mean, I think the CPRA ballot measure was, certainly a mandate in a way that, I guess we've never seen in this country, that Californians do want privacy in a pretty clear way and give that authority to, the agency to really enforce, or AG to enforce. And yeah, I mean, they're going to be setting the tone here for a long time to come.
And look, I've asked Tom Kemp this directly. Like, I think there's also a debatable question around whether the mandate they were given has definitely hit the target of where they're going in terms of enforcement. And that sort of leads me to the data broker question, because that term, gets thrown around a lot. And now California has, added their own specific legal definition. So I would love it if you would walk us through exactly how California is defining a data broker under CCPA and the Delete Act. And, do those definitions diverge? What are some of the practical implications of those definitions?
Again, the CCPA never really addressed or defined the data broker. That came through a separate legislative measure that was originally just a sort of a registration measure for data brokers, similar to like Vermont already had on the books, just to say, hey, we want to know who those companies are. We want to display them on our website. Let consumers go opt out on their own, as a transparency mechanism. That was where it sort of, came from. The definition that was in that, law was updated, but not really changed with the California Delete Act and SB 362. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, that is the law that Tom Kemp really, I don't know if he completely drafted it, but he definitely co-assisted with its development and lobbied for it to be passed. And that law really gives the CPPA that broad authority to define data brokers in a much more expansive way. But again, the baseline definition, a business that knowingly collects and sells to third parties the personal information of a consumer with whom the business does not have a direct relationship. And there are some intersections here between the Delete Act and the CCPA in terms of, what is a business, and so data brokers that are, again, small mom and pop businesses that really don't process like even 100,000 records a year, don't reach 25 million revenue, don't have 50% of their, business, from sales, or, don't get included as part of that. Although I think we know pretty much every data broker is going to meet those thresholds. They're pretty nominal to do business in that space. But the definition of sale or share is also really key here, because as we know, kind of coming from the ad tech space, that sale especially is extremely broad, the way it's interpreted. And so it doesn't really mean what it used to mean, which was, hey, you're going to pay me for, these leads, you're going to pay me for, appending this demographic data as a specific monetary value. It's really sort of any consideration that might possibly be included as part of that definition of sale under CCPA is now applied to the Delete Act, and any companies that get engaged in those kind of non-monetary consideration sharing situations or disclosures or making available or any of the sorts of categories of sale that we've now come to know as really inclusive in that definition. So it's a pretty big deal. And then again, the regs that the CPPA has issued around the definition, including the direct relationship issue, is really novel, I think, in terms of people's thinking around, well, what does that really mean? What is a sort of a direct relationship now? Because it's not what I think a lot of companies understand it to mean.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I want to touch on a bit. So as we apply that definition, and I guess you need to include the sale or share definition with the data broker definition. But here's a question that I think trips up a lot of companies. If a business is collecting consumer data primarily to serve its own customers, like a retailer or a bank or a website publisher, does that automatically exclude them from data broker status? And where does that direct relationship exemption begin and end?
It's going to get really tricky here. And I guess I definitely encourage everybody to read the regulations that the CPPA issued really, last year around what the changes they made to it are. I can read it to you if you'd like, but I guess I could TLDR it to say, there's an intent standard here that the individual must know really that they're sharing their information with that entity, which is super important because intent is, somewhat subjective. But I guess the key point that they made was that, the business does not have a direct relationship from the consumer simply because it collects the information directly. And that's really important in one really big context, which is ad tech. So, we think of cookies as having a direct relationship between, the cookie provider and the individual. But CPPA has made that clear. No, just because you're a third-party cookie doesn't make you have a direct relationship. And that really kind of expands things significantly.
Yeah. And let's talk about the ad tech ecosystem. So, if you're a DSP, a DMP, or a data clean room, I think you had some really interesting comments a couple of weeks ago on clean rooms. I mean, I think those companies are sort of assuming that they're not selling data in the traditional sense. But how does California's broad definition of sale, which includes that type of sharing for cross-context behavioral advertising, how does that change the calculus here?
It changes it significantly. And I think I just want to be like crystal clear on this point. Any business, especially in ad tech, can now be defined as a data broker. And it doesn't matter if your contract says you're a service provider. That's completely different. Like, you may have all the best commercial terms in the world that say, I'm a service provider, I'm doing XYZ business purposes. But at the end of the day, if you're making available third-party data and you're combining third-party data and you're enabling, a third party to monetize off that data somewhere else, even if you don't touch it, and even if it goes through a data clean room, you're still going to be responsible for being a data broker. Privacy by design through a clean room doesn't negate, especially for ad targeting, really doesn't negate the fact that you're monetizing an audience through another media platform. And so if you're doing that, you're packaging up audiences, you're combining audiences together, and you're pushing that audience off to another media platform, the data that you did not collect yourself, that third-party data that you're now monetizing through another platform, is likely deemed a data broker activity. Now, the data clean room itself, I think, can still be an intermediary, can still be a service provider. But the companies that operate the clean room and merge that data together and monetize that data together on other platforms are definitely going to be in scope here, in my opinion. And it's hard to really get around that just because you have some sort of, commercial terms that say you're not really selling or sharing the data for that purpose.
Right, because if the output is some flavor of an inference, and that inference somewhere downstream is attached to a UID, like, they're pretty clear that that's still personal data.
It's not going to stop the sale from that first party, right? The first party retail media platform, the first party publishers, they can still sell their data all they want, and they're not going to be a data broker. It's just when they combine that data with other third party data, whether it is interest-based data, whether it's transactional data, whether it's demographic data, that packaging of data that gets monetized on another platform, that's what really I think the CPPA is trying to regulate here.
Got it. So I'm curious about some of the more traditional data brokers, like the Axioms and Experians of the world, or some of the people data aggregators. It seems like they're the cleanest target of the Delete Act. And I'm curious, what your sense of overall compliance within that segment of the data broker space is currently.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, as I said, I kind of grew up in that space, having gone to all the Direct Marketing Association conferences for a decade and worked for Experian for 10 years and know all the relationships that they had. So I would say, again, there are about 500 companies that were registered in 25. I just heard last week, it's not many more right now. It's only about 560, I think they said last week, that are now registered. They haven't published it yet. But the vast majority of those are those DMA members, the companies who just know that they're data brokers. They've been in it forever. That's not the audience, I think, that we're talking about here. Generally, that the CPPA is enforced against. Again, of those dozen or so enforcements, most of them were, companies that were smaller businesses that were sort of trying to maybe evade the California obligations. One was a big company that just just made a mistake in their renewal, S&P Global. But I'm not so worried about the Experian Axioms of the world, but rather that much, much broader long tail of tech businesses that use data, that supplement data, that make available data. Again, those are ad agencies as well. They're SaaS platforms. They're, sort of niche, technology plays. I did a quick scan right before, the end of the year, companies that may not be registered. And I found at least 100 in a matter of minutes. Just based on a few keywords that are kind of new sort of techniques that companies are using for data monetization. And I suspect, again, there's going to be many, many enforcement actions to come this year.
What's your sense of the publicly available data exemption? Because I've gotten the sense, and that might just be where my travels have taken me, but I do get the sense that is a pretty significant number of companies who seem to be basing their position on the fact that a lot of, maybe not all, but a good chunk of their data fits into the publicly available data exemption.
I mean, it's that last part that you just said that's the critical issue.
Yeah.
It's that it's not all of their data.
Right.
And again, like if you're only trafficking true really public record data, I would just call it that, not necessarily public available, because a lot of companies will say, oh, LinkedIn data is publicly available data. And we're just going to map it to an email address and sell it off to companies. And that we're not a data broker because it's all on LinkedIn. No, of course they're going to be a data broker in that category. But really anytime, and the CPPA has already said this in their enforcement action, anytime that a publicly available data aggregator creates inferences or maps additional data points to that data or combines data together from different data sources, they're going to be a data broker, even if the vast majority of their data may have been public record data to begin with.
I think that's a great point. And I think that's one that a lot of those companies seem to be missing. I don't know if they're ignoring it or they just don't know, but it does seem like it's not just one or two companies. So I'm curious with respect to some of the retail media networks, and that's been like a pretty hot term over the last year or two within the larger ad space. Walmart perhaps being like the pinnacle of that model. But like, how should those companies be thinking about whether or not they are tripping up some of these data broker rules?
Yeah, I work with a couple of clients, big clients in that space, and it is extremely difficult right now. It's like sort of a kind of like guardrails around the walled garden campaign data and potentially off-site or off-platform media that they might be extending their advertiser audience, to enable, because it is really tricky if you are enabling your sane retail walled garden, data to be used, to target on another media platform. You are running into this potential issue because, again, if you're using that advertiser data that says like, we onboarded through a clean room or whatever LiveRamp or whatever partner we're working with to map that first party data to this retail media data and then send it off to, social media or some other platform for ad targeting, you're monetizing data you didn't collect yourself. And that is, again, what we're talking about that the CPPA is really trying to regulate here, is that sort of that combination of third party data with first party data, where that, again, is monetized somewhere else. So walled garden stuff, no worries. I don't think there's really any risk if you're ad targeting within your ecosystem, but outside the ecosystem is potentially problematic.
What about some of the big tech companies or browsers or smart TV manufacturers or auto manufacturers? I mean, can one make a compelling case that these companies are or should be thought of as data brokers? I mean, you've got the Texas AG who's outlined, for better or worse, that a lot of data is leaving the smart TV space.
And the auto space. I think Texas also did an interesting, again, the Allstate insurance example, I think, being a big one there. And I would focus for a second on the auto industry, just, having known a bit about kind of what goes on behind the scenes, because there's been a tremendous amount of data sharing between the manufacturers and the dealers across dealerships, across states. And, there's a lot of, and again, all sorts of third party data appended to that, that sort of incestuous relationship between the manufacturers and the broker and the dealers and third party data providers to monetize that data to target ads to those individuals. I don't see how there aren't intersections here that some of those entities are going to be data brokers in this regard. Again, smart TVs, I put those and others still maybe in the walled garden category. I'm not, that some of them are trying to control their own ad ecosystem and maybe okay for the most part. But, again, they are licensing data as well. But some of those licensees of that data that are packaging it up and monetizing it on other media platforms are potentially data brokers as well. I know, and looking at the list, I know a couple of those companies that you're probably familiar with are registered already, that are packaging up smart TV data and then monetizing it through other channels. But again, I don't see any industry that's really exempt here, because the third party data industry, like the Experians and Axioms of the world, have their sort of, breadth of customers that cross every single type of industry vertical. And anytime that third party data is used, if it is monetized somewhere else, it just feels like it's going to be in scope here.
Yeah, I would agree. It's going to be very interesting to see how that ultimately plays out. I would imagine, although I guess you can't really guarantee, there's no guarantees in life, but I would imagine there will be a compliance warning of sorts, sometime in, Q1 or early Q2 before they start raining down lightning bolts. But that's just a guess.
I mean, I think they've been trying. I mean, Tom Kemp is, an excellent spokesperson. He was a great hire for the organization. He's very
completely agree.
PR friendly and is getting out there and like with you, and trying to make that case. But there's only so much you can really do in the industry before you really have to kind of drop the hammer. And, I think I just want to make sure that the talking point is here, September of 2026. If you are not registered, but really by August 1st of 2026, in September, they're going to start enforcing against their drop mechanism, which really has, again, bankruptcy level enforcement statutory penalties. This is not like what we've ever seen in the United States as far as the capability of a regulatory body to enforce such a potential penalty that it could bankrupt even big public companies. We're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars of fines that are just vanilla statutory penalties that you can't really challenge. It's not a consent decree. This is just, we're just going to fine you. And that's just day one. Like it multiplies, right? So if you don't comply. So it's really billions, potentially trillions of dollars of fines that could calculate over the course of the rest of the year.
It's almost a EU style fine structure combined with like a Lone Star Texas style enforcement mechanism. And it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I want to shift gears for a second and talk a little bit about authorized agents. And so I accidentally, and I mean that in air quotes here, I signed up for an authorized agent service called Broker Busters. And the reason it was sort of accidentally, I was starting to see some requests come from them. So you're naturally curious and you want to see, who are these guys? And I started signing up. And I hit the submit button, assuming that the next page would be okay, for $4.99 or $29.99 a month, we're going to take care of this for you. Turns out it's a free service. So I hit the button, and anybody out there that's getting requests from my email address, I'm really, really sorry. But on the other hand, it's given me some pretty good insight into how companies are complying with this. So now with that filibuster, I've got a couple of questions for you. The Broker Busters is what they call an authorized agent service. And I'm curious of what what's your sense of the authorized agent business, how it's developing, how helpful it is to consumers and its impact on the business community?
I think it started out well-intentioned, again, even before the CCPA with like the LifeLocks of the world and others that, again, try and package up identity theft protection and other sorts of true consumer benefits by trying to, do, data deletion and minimization, but it's evolved into something that, again, like there's no real friction to build an open source or free tool like Broker Busters and just start, firing off requests. And the law, CCPA in particular, is not particularly rigorous as far as like what it means to be an authorized agent. You don't need a true power of attorney or something that would create some friction in that industry. You just need to make it clear that you represent the individual. And having worked with, quite a few data brokers who get significant volumes of these requests, they are not always accurate, I think is the best way to say it. We've seen some sort of telephone book type requests come in. And so these companies have had to implement really sort of key sort of friction points to validate the authenticate these individuals are who they say they are and what they're trying to do. So I think there's, again, like there's like a lot of ads for like delete me and incognito. Like I hear it on my podcast. Like maybe you have ads for that. I don't know. But like they're out there publicly, going off on this, and they do serve I would say an intermediary purpose today to try and help with, consumer privacy. However, with the California drop mechanism coming into effect, in August, I don't see any value to them in California, at least, later this year. Consumers can just sign up, and that is the same thing as an authorized agent. Like the drop mechanism for Californians is an authorized agent, and processing all that data on their behalf. We're now seeing, again, lots of other states, potentially following suit. Maybe you'll see some federal action, at some point. That looks like the FTC Do Not Call Act. But, again, these registered agents, I don't see them as being necessarily long-lived as far as like a future business model.
Yeah, it does seem like the writing's on the wall. No, it may take 5-7 years for all of the states or the federal government to make this a nationwide standard. So there's going to be a role for them. But most of them are focused on deletion requests. There's very few. I don't know that I've seen an access request or a correction request coming from them, in part because I don't think the model doesn't really lend itself to that.
I don't know if I call this an authorized agent, but I have seen a particular plaintiff's law firm issuing access requests under the Shine the Light Act, not even under the CCPA. There's some novel legal theories around where that could interplay with litigation, but be on the lookout for those kinds of access requests. But because they technically are authorized agents, they're just coming from a law firm instead of a incognito type company.
So I've got another question, and what's your sense of the 550 data brokers who, by the way, are all receiving these types of requests? Because I think the first thing an authorized agent does is you figure out who's listed on the California Data Broker Registry, and then you just add all of them. What's your sense of the compliance level across that 550 companies?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak on for the ones I've worked with. That, before we even register, I've worked with quite a few before they register with California or the other states. I've made it crystal clear to them, you must have your sort of data subject rights portal ready for scale, because, as you said, like you flip the switch and all of a sudden, the floodgates turn on and you better be able to respond in a statutory way, to these requests. And again, split out, the opt-out ones from deletions, and less friction on opt-outs and, more friction on deletion and access and just how you do that. But yeah, it's a huge problem. And, again, I often prescribe, don't do just like a privacy at email address if you're a data broker, because you are going to get, absolutely flooded with emails. You do need some sort of form. You need some sort of drop down. Make sure like it's a human that, is able to respond to these requests and not just like make it available for bots and AI agents now to do on behalf of these third parties.
So I'm just going to go under the assumption that someone who is working with you has thought a lot of this stuff through. But my experience in just getting back 550 responses is that the level of compliance is just all over the map. There are responses which just aren't really in clear English, let alone whether they comply with the statute. Like I could read through some of these responses and look, I do this for a living and I have no idea what they mean, what needs to happen, whether I need to click somewhere to double verify it. And I mean, and some of that is that, it's often not the chief privacy officer who is dealing with, these kind of operational issues. And so oftentimes I think that this is the exact area that gets way under-resourced and way under-focused in not every, but a lot of organizations. And that's a huge problem.
It is a huge problem. And it does take up a ton of time, again, usually for junior, customer support people. And you are in your right to push back on, again, the nonsensical requests or what don't seem accurate or don't really seem authorized at all. And again, most importantly, that they are operating within those states that even allow for those kinds of, authorized agent requests, because there are lots of states that currently don't require that or offer that as part of their laws. And so, there is some sort of triage that does have to take place. But yeah, it's unfortunate, that they're getting flooded, but it's now it's just part of the business of being a data broker.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And hopefully companies start pretty soon to get religion on this. But by the way, you said the August 1 deadline. Do you have a better sense? Because I think you're really hyper focusing in this area. Do you have a sense of when testing is going to begin with the drop?
Yeah, I think they said they're going to release the API specs really, and then she actually showed them last week. They at the event, like just a screenshot next month, so in March, and I think testing will begin in April.
Okay. So that sounds like they're hopefully. It's funny, as I'm off talking to people about this, I don't want to say it's going to be a huge lift. I don't want to say it's going to be a light lift because I don't really know. And so I think it's like until you get in there, whether this is going to be, it's probably not going to be 1,000 person hours. It's probably not going to be 5. And setting this stuff up is something that hopefully companies are resourced for.
I mean, I work with quite a few companies that are kind of all over the place. There's like the tech native companies that came up, with sort of automation in mind from the beginning. And then there's like the old school ones that, kind of came from the old DMA days. Those companies I think are in deep development trouble, I guess I would say, over the next 6 months to get there. And it could be 1,000 hours. Like it really is complex, what's required in the drop mechanism. And I am intimately familiar with what the requirements are. And it is a non-trivial for any company, but certainly for those old school companies, they're going to be really scrambling, I think, up until the last minute to get this thing done and ready.
Yeah, well, that's just it. I can't wait to see the company who decides to vibe code their API integration, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, so looking out 3 to 5 years, how does the data broker regulatory landscape look different than it does today? And really what I'm getting at is the Delete Act a ceiling, or is it a floor and we're going to see more and more stuff?
I think from a sort of a macro industry perspective, we're going to see contraction in this industry. I don't think there's a way for the historical sort of long tail of small mom and pop businesses that have operated historically as data brokers to really survive, I think, in light of what's coming. And again, looking most forward to all the other states that have now raised their hand and say, yes, we want a drop mechanism as well. And it could be 50 states, kind of similar to data security laws. Like, it could easily become 50 states in 5 years very quickly. So I think the writing is sort of on the wall for companies that aren't capable of really regulating themselves into a place that, gives them some operational, headway. Because it's not going to be easy to be in that industry in 5 years. I just think it's going to be tricky, for anyone. Now we'll see again if federal law comes in, potentially preempts state law and changes the dynamic of what could be included in a deletion mechanism. But I'm very pessimistic. I don't see federal law coming in at all, and certainly not preempting and removing all of these state initiatives. But I think it's going to be very clear very quickly that other states, again, New York and a number of other states have very publicly said they want this mechanism. And it will, but there's no going to be lobby. There's no lobbyist group. And I was like a lobbyist for this industry 30 years ago, but there's really no one left. Like the ANA doesn't lobby for them. IAB really doesn't lobby for them. There's no friction for them to pass these laws. Not really. So I expect it to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think that it's funny how we come full circle, but we need a direct marketing association 3.0 or something like that, because like a lot of these companies are going to have a whole bunch of compliance challenges, and maybe they just all get great outside counsel like you. But I do think that industry could use a voice. We'll see if one emerges.
I mean, again, it could be the IAB, it could be the ANA. They could definitely step up, because I think they need to come to this realization that the data broker law, like Delete Act and all these other state laws, really do impact their industry. It's like they've always kind of looked the other way at data brokers just because of like the bad rep or something like that. But now it's like squarely in their core industry function. And I just don't see how they can ignore that, over the next couple of years.
So I've got one final question. This has been a fantastic discussion, Ben, and I really appreciate you joining me. So you had advised a whole bunch of companies across the spectrum on these types of issues. What is the single biggest ongoing misconception that you encounter? What is it that, the thing that when you hear it, you kind of know a company is in trouble?
I mean, I've now seen this. I mean, I said it 5 years ago, I think, when the CCPA was coming out. So many, again, CEOs in particular of companies say, we don't sell data. They're still saying it in 2026. And you go to their privacy policies, and their privacy policies say it. We don't sell data. And they don't even have like that kind of a caveat statement for CCPA that's like, except for third-party cookies, right? Some do, and they try and sort of, massage that language. But there's this sort of notion that, that there's an integrity with a business, that they're not going to monetize user data. And I think the most obvious example of that right now is OpenAI. And, besides the fact that they've, degraded themselves from a nonprofit to a for-profit, separate issue, but like the same issues happening with their ads product right now, where, the most intimate consumer personal details that people are sharing with these tools. And now they're monetizing their audience, but we're not monetizing what you're saying. Not yet. But come on, really? Like, is that really going to happen over the long term? So we hear these sort of sentiment statements. I mean, again, I think Sam has said it. Others have said it. OpenAI, we're not going to do this with your intent data or response data. But I think that's really an open question. And, as a privacy professional, I'd be kind of yelling from the rafters, like, you need real privacy by design here, and you need to be transparent as hell about it, and you need to lock it down. And the board, needs to lock it down, right? Like, it's gotta, if you're going to say what you're going to say, you really got to create some backing for that, and not just expect that, people are going to hear it and, hope for the best later.
OpenAI is a really, really good example. So all of the financial analysts are saying that they're in some variation of near financial doom. They need to generate revenue, and they're seeing the ads business as the way to do that. But just think about this in comparison to other, tech companies or even media companies. How quickly can you scale to 2 billion a quarter? And because it took Google, 7 or 8 years. It took, Netflix 3 or 4 years to get to 2 billion. And they had Peter friggin' Naylor working with them on the ads product. So OpenAI is going to try to do that. And in order to get there, they are going to be under tremendous pressure to move very quickly away from whatever promise they happen to make on February 1st of 2026. And that's going to be a huge challenge for them.
I mean, again, going back to the beginnings of my career about email marketing, right? And really setting sort of the tone for best practices in consent. What does it really mean to have a direct consumer relationship that is transparent and they're aware of what the company is doing with their data and how they want to be communicated with? And OpenAI can certainly implement these best practices for consent. Not, again, cookie consent, like we're saying, nobody really understands what the hell is going on with cookie consent. But you do understand when you sign up for an email that you're going to get that email from that company and not every third party on the planet, right? So OpenAI has an opportunity here, I think, to really look at privacy in a new way, in a contextual relationship with what people are using the tool for. And they could really create personalized ads and targeted ads, and again, within their ecosystem, but it's got to be based on this true one-to-one relationship, because they have a one-to-one relationship already with the tools. So they should have a one-to-one relationship with the ads in a much more significant way that could, again, scale into multi-billions, but it can't be based on anything we've ever seen in the ad tech ecosystem. It has to be something brand new that really keeps AI as the core privacy focus in that relationship. I think they can do it. I believe any company can really use privacy by design in a thoughtful way, an innovative way. I just don't have faith that they're doing it based on what I've heard and the way that they've been operating. And right, maybe to your point, the desperation that may be taking place inside the company, that is never a good place to make decisions from, and could lead to really bad results.
Couldn't agree more. So Ben, where can my audience find you and learn more about your work?
I post a lot on LinkedIn, so you'll find me there. My website's inhouseprivacy.com. And happy to engage.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Isaacson. Big round of applause. That was a great discussion. Ben is an old friend and was one of the people I reached out to when I was first starting up Chappell & Associates. I am grateful to Ben and to all the other privacy pros who were willing to give me 20 minutes of their time as I was just cutting my teeth in the privacy space. A few things I want to pull out from that conversation. First, the data broker definition. Ben made a point that I cannot stress enough. Having a contract that designates you as a service provider does not protect you from being classified as a data broker under California law. And also, if you are combining third-party data with first-party data and monetizing that combination on another platform, even through a clean room, even without directly touching the data yourself, you are potentially in scope of this rule. If your legal team hasn't walked through that analysis recently, that conversation needs to happen now. Second, the drop deletion mechanism in California. API specs are expected in March. Testing is supposed to begin in April. August 1st is the hard deadline. And as Ben pointed out, there is no safe harbor for mistakes. For companies that grew up in the old direct marketing world and weren't necessarily built with all automation in mind, this is going to be a heavy lift. Third, the publicly available data exemption. This one keeps coming up, and I keep seeing companies lean on it in ways that simply won't hold up. The moment you append additional data points, create inferences, or combine sources, even if the underlying data started out as a public record, the California regulators have already signaled that you lose that exemption. This is not a gray area anymore. And lastly, there's the OpenAI thread that we had at the end of our discussion, which I think represents sort of a perfect storm of regulatory and business challenges. OpenAI is under enormous financial pressure. The ads business is the obvious revenue lever, and the data they're sitting on is unlike anything any ad platform has ever had access to. We're not talking about browsing history or purchase signals. We're talking about the most intimate, unfiltered thoughts, things that people routinely share with an AI tool. Health concerns, relationship problems, financial anxieties, career doubts. So OpenAI has made reassuring noises about putting guardrails on how that data gets monetized. But as Ben points out, and as I'd echo, reassuring noises are not privacy by design. They are not board-level commitments, and they tend to have a short shelf life when the revenue pressure gets real enough. Many, if not most, financial analysts are predicting that OpenAI will be under huge revenue pressures over the coming months. The pressure for OpenAI to adjust all of those early promises will be massive. And unlike Google, OpenAI doesn't have the benefit of 15 years to gradually enshittify its services. Ben actually made an optimistic case, and I want to give him credit for that. He argued that OpenAI has something many ad platforms don't have, which is a genuine one-to-one relationship with the user. If they build their ad products around that relationship with real transparency, they could create something that actually scales without burning down user trust. That's a real opportunity. Whether Sam Altman has the patience to leverage that opportunity, given all of the pressure, is a different question entirely. And that's the through line of this whole conversation. From the Delete Act to clean rooms to data brokers to authorized agents to OpenAI, the question is always the same. Are you building something that you would be comfortable explaining to the person whose data you're using? If the answer is yes, you've got a shot. You've got a shot at building trust and at avoiding regulatory fire. If you found this episode useful, please share it. And just a reminder, folks, we're just two guys talking. Nobody here is providing legal advice. Get your advice directly from your favorite privacy person or attorney. We've got a bunch of other fantastic guests coming up on the Monopoly Report podcast over the next few weeks. We'll have Tony Katzer from the IAB Tech Lab, Sheila Colclazier, who spent years and years at Axiom and IPG. We've got some really smart people from some of the big tech companies talking about their new content marketplaces. And we've got a few representatives from state AG offices on to talk about enforcement. It's going to be a party here on the Monopoly Report as we head into the spring. Please subscribe to the show at monopolyreportpod.com or on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And thanks for listening.